Hello, we're trying to make sense of the harmonic series as it relates to both nature and us. And in the previous video in this series, I'll put a link up above, we talked about nature's perspective, the fact that it has this sequence of harmonics based on integer multiples of a fundamental, 110, 220, 330, 440, 550, and that's how it constructs its tones. Everything that we hear in nature, every sound that we hear, pitched sound, is some combination of these stacked harmonics. That doesn't make very much sense to us from the perspective of a musical scale, because as we heard in the previous video, when we play that sequence of harmonics, they don't sound very nice. They initially sound very nice and then quickly go out of tune. But the one thing that we were able to take was that the perfect fifth was really important. It was the first non-tonic note, the first non-root note in the sequence. It has this ratio of 3:2, which is the purest ratio after 2:1. And when we play a root and a perfect fifth together, they sound great. We have to base anything that we do when we're talking about music on what our ears actually tell us. The root and the perfect fifth are the purest, most natural sounding combination of notes, and nature agrees with us. And so we're going to use that as a basis of anything that we do. And the way that we actually implemented it is really quite glorious. We came up with this concept of the circle of fifths. Now I'm using Guitar Tutor here because most circle of fifths are based in C, but they actually work in every key. And so here my circle of fifths is based in A. And what we're saying here is that every note that we step clockwise on this scale is an increase in frequency, in pitch, of 3:2 from the previous note. So to get from A to E, we multiply our 220 by 1.5 to get to 330, and now we're generating an E. And that's what nature tells us as well. Ignore the fact that when we sent it through the tuner, we were 2 cents out. That's part of the compromise that we'll discuss later. But as far as nature's concerned, the 3:2 ratio is king. Once we've done that once, we can carry on stepping forward in ratios of 3:2 from that new starting point. So from E, if we increase that frequency by 1.5, we get to B, and then G flat, and we can go all the way around this scale. Now if we do that 12 times, we get back to a point where our frequency is really, really, really close to an integer power of our initial frequency. Now I'm going to do a little bit of maths now, but it's not too difficult, hopefully. We want to try to find out whether or not, if we step through that circle of fifths, that the frequency that we get to once we've done all of those steps is anywhere close to where we would hope it to be. Now if we step up in octaves, if we go up 7 octaves around the circle of fifths, let's just nip back here again, you can do the sums for yourself, but to get from here all the way around back to the beginning, we've had to go up 7 octaves. So to go up in terms of actual octaves, that's we've doubled our frequency 7 times, which is 2 to the power of 7, 128. If we're stepping up in ratios of perfect fifths, we've gone up 3:2 is our ratio, and we've stepped up that ratio 12 times. So the way that we represent that is to say 3 to the power of 12, which is that number. Let's copy that down. Divided by 2 to the power of 12 is that number, 4096. What happens if we divide those two numbers together? 531441 divided by 4096. It's really, really close to 128. That's the mathematically closest we can get to a workable system whereby stepping up in 12 3:2 ratios gets us back to the same point that we would have done if we'd stepped up in 7 octaves. In other words, the perfect fifth sequence, by stepping up in stacked fifths and doing it 12 times and getting back round to our root position, is mathematically good enough. It's less than 1% away from being where that frequency should be. And so sonically it sounds fantastic. That's why the entire circle of fifths sounds great. As we step up in these 3:2 ratios, eventually we get round back to pretty much the point that we started from, which is very close to the increase of 7 octaves that we want it to be. And that alone kind of forces us to use 12 notes, because by going around the circle of fifths, we've inadvertently almost created 12 distinct tones. Now there's another way of looking at the circle of fifths that gives us more support when we're trying to shoehorn our ever-evolving set of requirements into the system that we're trying to find. So we've decided that we want 12 notes, and that would be good, but we want to kind of tie it as much to nature as we possibly can. Well, let's have a look back at these ratios that nature gives us, because after we go from the root to the perfect fifth at a ratio of 3:2, the next interval going from 330 Hz to 440 generates a ratio of 4:3. That's a perfect fourth. If we travel counterclockwise around the circle of fifths, the distance from A to D is a perfect fourth. The distance from D to G is a perfect fourth. When we stack all of these fourths together and travel all the way around the circle of fifths backwards, that works perfectly as well. So the circle of fifths is elegant as regards nature in both directions. It's symmetrical. So now we've got really strong support for our root note being at 110 and our perfect fifth being at a ratio of 3:2 above that, and our perfect fourth being at a ratio of 4:3 above that. So we've basically fitted in 3 of the pieces of the puzzle. Awesome. The next piece of the puzzle that we want to work out is the major third, because when we looked on our ratio chart, 5:4 is the next purest ratio. When we play that note, it sounds nice. Now we saw on our tuner it was actually detuned slightly. Let's not worry about that too much. That's part of the compromise that we're having to kind of work out with nature in order to get all of this stuff to work. But the fact is that we have this new note, the major third note, that fits in. If we slot that in at a ratio of 5:4, now we've got 4 notes and they're working really well. We've got our fundamental 3:2, 4:3, 5:4. Once that's done, once we've got those 4 notes done, we've got an immensely usable scale. It's harmonically very strong. All of the ratios are beautiful. They sound great to our ears. That's the most important thing. Our human brains love these small ratios. We've never really been able to explain completely why, but we hear it in nature and it sounds great. And the smaller the ratio, the better it sounds. So those first 3 notes on the harmonic series are the strongest notes, the most consonant notes. We'll deal with consonants in its own right a little bit later. But for now, we've got these architectural foundations laid. From that point onwards, things get a little bit knotty. We're going to have to descend into pretty deep maths in order to work out how we're going to fit the rest of our notes into a usable scale, because the entire thing is logarithmic and we've got these fixed points at 5:4 and 4:3 and 3:2 on the ascending logarithmic scale. But of course we need to fill in all of the rest of the notes. We've already decided we wanted 12 notes because of our concept of stacked fifths, and we want to ensure that the root and the perfect fifth are strong at all times, so they're pretty much immutable. And then when we bring the perfect fourth into the situation, we've now got kind of a set division of, well, these 2 notes are a certain distance apart, a certain ratio apart. Let's make sure all of the other notes make some kind of sense. The reason why I've started to become very vague rather than working in specifics is because the harmonic series starts letting us down at this point as far as our ears are concerned. It doesn't sound very good past this point. When we try to introduce this next note at 770, things kind of fall apart. There isn't a pleasant interval at 7-6. The note that we generate doesn't really sit anywhere usable on the scale. It sounds out of tune. lots of things are wrong about it. And so we can no longer have that degree of confidence that we can just walk hand in hand with the harmonic series. We've extracted the most value we can out of its mathematical purity, and we're pretty much on our own now, working out a set of compromises to make the rest of the notes fit into the scale. Now this is where the concept of just intonation comes in, because via a process of maths that's frankly beyond me, and for the practical purposes of the discussion that I'm trying to have here, not very useful to us, a set of ratios was worked out by which the other notes of the scale were dropped into place. And you can see what all of these ratios are here. So here's the perfect fifth and the perfect fourth and the major third, all exactly as described. And then you can see the other ratios that have been calculated that get us a reasonably pleasant looking logarithmic scale that works. The just intonation scale, as written there using those ratios, sounds wonderful. And you can figure out what each of those frequencies are in the key of A and play a scale in the key of A with just intonation, and it will all sound wonderful. The reason why it's called just intonation, by the way, just is an Old English word for true or correct, and it's actually still used in typefacing. You have left and right justification. That means making it correct, making it even and correct. And that's what the just intonation scale is all about. It's about being pure, as close as possible to nature. And people with perfect pitch, apparently I haven't got it, prefer the just intonation scale to the chromatic scale because it sounds more consonant, more beautiful. There are two problems with the just intonation scale. One is that some of the notes that we describe as tones in the scale, in other words, two semitones and a whole tone step, have different ratios within the just intonation scale. So you have sharp whole tones and flat whole tones. Despite the fact that they are two semitones, they actually have different ratios. The second problem is that you have to redefine the frequencies that you use. You have to retune your instruments for every different key that you play in. So now this is a nightmare from a practical perspective. If your orchestra wants to play one piece in A and another piece in B flat, you have to actually retune your instruments because the ratios remain the same, but the actual frequencies of the played notes change, and so the instruments themselves have to be tuned. So the just intonation is this halfway point where we've started with nature, we've started with this perfect set of numbers at the beginning, this perfect series of ratios, 3:2, 4:3, 5:4, and we've based our musical structure on that, and that in turn has given us 12 notes. And then we've used just intonation to figure out what ratios, what's the best ratios we can use to fill in those remaining gaps. And now we've got a usable scale, but usable in air quotes because it's got problems. And so the next evolutionary step for us as human beings wanting to play musical instruments was to figure out a scale that was a compromise that meant we didn't have to retune our instruments every time we changed key. And that if we defined a semitone or a tone, that they had equal divisions between themselves within the scale. That was the next step of the process. That's the 12-tone equal tempered scale, and that will be the subject of our next video. I hope you'll join me then. Thanks very much for watching.